feel very fortunate to be the chairperson of the 150th committee, but I could not do it alone. I give thanks to Pastor Mike for his leadership and for my chair people that were on our committee. Their strength, their talent, their ideas, their time and dedication, this would not have been without their help in this. So I cannot do it alone, did not do it alone, and without all of you, it would not have gone off as well as it did. So thank you all, and happy 150th.
The year is 1867. America's Civil War had ended 2 years earlier. German immigrants sought refuge in the northern communities of Allegheny County to rebuild and move forward. Some had served in the war and were seeking to get back to the quiet and peaceful living of country life, away from the sounds of battle. Some sought religious freedom as well. Perrysville in Ross Township was one of those areas north of the growing city of Pittsburgh. The German immigrants found a small rural community available for farming. The founding families of the area set forth the task of building a religious community on this ground. Based on the Protestant teachings they had been raised with, St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church was founded by 15 German families. Members erected the wooden chapel, and services began shortly thereafter. 1867 also saw settlers in the Ross and Perrysville area who followed the Roman Catholic tradition establish the St. Teresa of Avila parish, which also celebrates its 150th anniversary in 2017.
St. John's was founded by 15 German immigrants and who were farmers, and because this 1867 was all farmland, and they had settled in this area. They wanted a place where they could congregate to gather and build community, and also worship God. And they worshiped in the German language up until, for the first 50 years, up until 1916. When they switched to English, whenever America got involved with the First World War, there were a lot of pressure. There was a lot of pressure on people of German ancestry to disavow themselves from anything that was German, and so they switched to English. And you could see the abrupt change in that in the parish registry, because in 1916 that was the first time that English entries were made. Or entries were made in English. They worship together, and oftentimes I've thought about that immigrant church that we assumed that they had a lot in common with each other, but most likely they didn't. They just came together because of language and the love they had of God. And I think that speaks to us that our unity today really is in Jesus Christ and in His kingdom, and doesn't come through the affects of language or even our status, social status or economic status or anything like that. It comes primarily through the Lord. And so that was the congregation that built the wooden church that's a chapel today. And then of course it was added on in 1939, and it was added on as well in 1954, and then the sanctuary was built in 1961. This office is part of the addition of the educational wing that was erected in 1983.
The services were in traditional German and remained that way until the United States entered the Great War against Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1917. Controversy over the language became a problem within the church, as native Germans found themselves being ostracized for the use of the German language in an American church. St. John's opted to conduct services in English beginning in 1919 to avoid further conflict. As the church grew into the 21st century, so did its physical structure. The wooden chapel on Old Perry Plank Road was remodeled, and a newer stone version took shape in the 1930s. the Perry Plank Road was paved and renamed Perry Highway. The population of the northern suburbs transitioned from farming to neighborhood housing plans and stores, taking advantage of the improvements made in the road. Throughout the next few decades, St. John's witnessed this change and began to feel the effects of the population surge. The 1950s saw the addition of the Undercroft for large congregational gatherings and Sunday school classes. By 1960, the church once again found itself needing to expand. The chapel could no longer support the growing congregation during the years of the baby boom, and through a generous donation, St. John's erected the modern nave and sanctuary to be an addition to the chapel. The nave could hold more people and services were filled. It was during these years that St. John's became a congregation of the American Lutheran Church.
I think that we have a lot in common with those people in the sense that St. John's still sees its primary task to build community, to proclaim the gospel here in this particular area. And that is still our mission today. I think we have a wonderful mission statement to know the love of God, to show the love of Christ. It's something that every Sunday school kid can repeat and know, but it's something that takes a lifetime to live into. We have here in the display case certain documents that show our history. One are bulletins from different anniversaries, from like the 40th anniversary, the 75th anniversary, and the 100th anniversary. Here's a Christmas card that shows the sanctuary that we now use with 2 live Christmas trees decorating, and also poinsettias. If you would move right next to that, you can see pictures of Perrysville from very early on, the wooden church that's now our chapel. Before it was covered with a stone veneer, and also different parts of downtown Perrysville. There's a picture of the firemen's parade, and also a picture of John Artsberger, who was one of the founding members of our congregation and is buried in the historic cemetery that is right beside the church. We have some more documents about certain dedications of the organ and the rededication of the chapel organ. We also have a from 1882. You can see in German a confirmation certificate for one of the early members of our congregation. And then we have a local paper that was printed in Westview. And I don't know this for sure, but it looks a lot like St. Luke's Lutheran Church on the cover. And then right next to there is a photocopy of a newspaper article about former pastor of St. John's, Pastor Trump, who died on a Hell ship, which was a prisoner of war transportation ship that was owned by the Japanese. And then right below there, you can see the pork and sauerkraut dinner ticket. The pork and sauerkraut dinner still remains a big event in the life of our congregation. And so that history goes way back. Here we have several different devotionals and hymnals. You can see here, this is a German devotional book, probably given to someone, a young person, perhaps on their confirmation to celebrate that event. We have different other hymnals that were used in the church. They're in German, and back then, the first church, Members were expected to have their own personal hymnal and to bring that to worship with them. And then we have other devotionals and hymnals and some Sunday school books as well that have been used throughout the history.
In 1983, needing to expand and improve its facility, especially to provide more space for Christian education, St. John's added the educational wing to the back of the church. This addition allowed for Sunday school classes in modern rooms, an atrium for gatherings, the pastor's office, and the church office, as well as a youth gathering room. It was dedicated as the Robert Strobel Educational Wing in 2002. 1983 also saw the addition of a brand new Moeller pipe organ in the sanctuary. The internal structure of the church had to be redone in order to accommodate this new centerpiece. The altar was moved forward, and the chancel moved behind it under the main stained glass windows. This organ has been a focal point of worship service here at St. John's for over 30 years. Many organists have played across the years, including Ruth Horney, Charlotte Roederer, Marty Barstow, and our current organist and music director, John Thickey. St. John's has seen many pastors over its 150 years of service to the North Hills community. These photos can be seen inside the old chapel on the north wall, from traditional and conservative to progressive and liberal. The leaders of worship made indelible marks on the congregation and brought the love of Christ to the people of the community. One was a war hero. Pastor Herbert R. Trump served the St. John's congregation from 1926 to 1929. He became a chaplain in the Navy and served in the Philippines during the Second World War. There he served sailors in combat and ended up being captured. He was lost at sea when the Japanese prison vessel he was on was sunk. His sacrifice as a serviceman and his service to this congregation enriched the lives of many as he proclaimed the gospel of Christ. In 1985, St. John's called its first female pastor, the Reverend Margaret Sewer Barkley. Some pastors were young with families. Others were older, coming to St. John's after serving other parishes. However, the common thread among them all was the call to service in the congregation and the community.
My parents were married here in 1956. Reverend Saucy performed the ceremony. Danny and I were married here in 1979. We had a substitute pastor that day. We still joke about Reverend Luther Lautenschlager, who performed the ceremony. Our third child, Casey, was married here in October, so that was 3 generations married here at St. John's. Our 2 granddaughters were baptized here, so the tradition of St. John's is very near and dear to our heart. We have a lot of great memories. A lot of good friends and family come from St. John's, and so we're thankful for all the times and the fellowship we have here.
St. John's has been blessed with many long-term pastors. The longest serving is Pastor Strobel, who came here in 1968 and stayed until his retirement through the end of 2001. Pastor Strobel has always been an inspiration to me. We've remained good friends and very committed to the gospel, very committed to the church, and extremely hardworking. He had that reputation. He also had a reputation for really making people of all different walks of life feel very welcomed here at St. John's. And that too is an inspiration to me as well, something that I would like to think I've continued on in my ministry here as well. Pastor Strobel and I remain good friends. It's nice to have him in the neighborhood. Occasionally, we go out and eat lunch together, and we talk about ministry. We talk about the church, not just simply St. John's, but also the national church and the changes in society that we have witnessed over the years.
Pastor Strobel oversaw our transition during the merger of the American Lutheran Church with the Lutheran Church in America and the Association of Evangelical Lutheran Churches in 1987 to form the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. In 1992, St. John's celebrated its 125th anniversary with an impressive celebration. 125 years of serving in the Perrysville community culminated in an outdoor festival and luncheon. Guests from the past joined with the congregation to celebrate an historic milestone in the church's history.
One of the great things about being pastor for so long and to arrive when I did, I got the stories of all the shut-ins that they remembered of way back in terms of the history of St. John's. How one of the ladies would talk about how on Christmas Eve, when it snowed, they would come out with a sleigh. There was a place for the horses to be hitched around the corner, and people would have candles in the sleigh wrapped up in a buffalo robe, and bells ringing, and people coming to Highland and Northmont and St. Teresa's as well as St. John's. What I liked about the 125th anniversary is we had a luncheon for all the people who were over 80, and they shared all their memories of way back when St. John's was at its inception. Ben, your uncle preached the sermon and picked up on what Reverend Salsey used to always talk about, how St. John's was literally on the highway. And I remember that we had a huge tent, a wonderful meal. St. John's people always provide great eats and have healthy appetites. But the thing that I guess I really thought that was good was we had a huge tent in the parking lot next to the sanctuary, and I think it was Dan Liebeck, stayed up all night or tried to sleep on the highway under the tent so that nobody would steal the stuff that had been put out. And it was a gala up here. It was really wonderful. And so was 150th.
A more traditional pastor and a graduate of Capital University brought the German worship traditions to a modern congregation and made them relevant and purposeful for a whole new generation of members. His 34-year tenure at St. John's set the foundation for many of the traditions we share at St. John's today, including the singing of the first verse of Silent Night, or Stille Nacht, in German during the Christmas Eve services.
When my husband and I first joined St. John's back in 1999, Pastor Strobel was still the pastor here. He is a warm and caring man, just a wonderful presence. He actually renewed Jim and I's wedding vows for our 10th anniversary, which was a very nice experience to have him involved in. I didn't get to spend a large number of years with him because shortly after we joined is when he retired from St. John's, but it was a pleasure the time that we did get to spend with him.
I had gone for my continuing ed to Princeton Seminary. Pastors get a study leave as part of their package, and it's usually 4 or 5 days at wherever they'd like to go. I went to Princeton and I met a man who told me that he had gotten the Spirit and that he announced, unknown to his wife, from the pulpit of his Presbyterian church, that he would be retiring a year from the date. The Synod always says, you only give a congregation 3 months because you're sort of dead in the water after you say you're going to retire. But anyway, this pastor told me it was the best year of his life. And so I decided to do that. I met with the church council. I had already put a letter to all members of the congregation that I was going to retire after 32 years. And it was sort of difficult because, first of all, many of the young people in our congregation had never had another pastor but me. So I went to the council meeting, the next council meeting after announcing my retirement, and they had already done their homework. They said, which would be best? You leave and then we get a new pastor, or we get a new pastor and then you leave? And I said, well, to be very honest, it would be a lot easier for me to leave and then you get a new pastor, but I'll do whatever you want. At the next council meeting, they had already met with the bishop, and they said, we're getting a new pastor, and you're going to work together for a while. And I am a man of little faith. I went home and told my wife, oh no, this is not going to work. Well, I was wrong. I was wrong. Pastor Mike showed up. I immediately said, you are now the pastor. I'm going to move out of the beautiful study down, in the, what is now the Strobel Hall, which was a memorable event in my life. And he said, oh, no. And then the bishop, when he met, he said, no. He said, you're the senior pastor till the end of the year. And that time with Pastor Mike was very well. It broke me up when he came and met with the congregation, because he said, Pastor Strobel always tells us he's a PK, a pastor's kid. He said, I too am a PK. I'm a policeman's kid. But anyway, we got along very fine. Usually, it happens that the former pastor and the new pastor, sometimes that doesn't work very well. It has worked perfectly. We go to lunch every once in a while. He's asked me a few questions over the years, and I've asked him some, and so it has been a very cordial relationship.
Pastor Strobel retired from St. John's, creating an opportunity for a new pastor and perhaps a new vision for the church. Pastor Michael Robinson, a native North Carolinian and graduate of Lutheran Theological Southern Seminary, brought new, youthful leadership to the congregation. The change was a significant one for the church, as this new pastor followed on the heels of the longest tenured pastor in the church's history. However, his Southern accent and progressive outlook took St. John's into the beginning of the 21st century.
Well, I was serving my second call at St. Mark's in Oakland, Maryland, and I received a invitation from Bishop Donald McCoy to come and interview at St. John's. And so I decided I would go and explore what Pittsburgh was like and what St. John's-Perrysville was like. And so the interview went well, and after that I was extended a call. During the process of that interview, I came across an unusual plan for the transition from following Pastor Strobel, who had a long 34-year tenure here at St. John's. According to the plan was that I would serve with him for 2 months. And so having received the call in September of 2001, I arrived here at St. John's November 1st, 2001, and worked with Pastor Strobel until his retirement, which was the last Sunday of December in 2001. And so I've been serving continuously here for the past 15 and a half years, and have really enjoyed my time here. It's a wonderful congregation that I believe does a lot of things well.
I think Pastor Mike's transition to St. John's was an adjustment for all of us. He had big shoes to fill, and I think he would agree with that. And I think he has done an admirable job of filling those shoes. It was an adjustment in that Pastor Mike's church, where he had preached previously, was a congregation-led church, and our church here at St. John's under Pastor Strobel was more of a pastoral-led church. So it was an adjustment for all of us when with that change, but I think it was a good change. It got the members of the church more involved in taking an active role in how the church was run and seeing to the care of our church. Pastor Mike is a very kind man. He's always ready with a word of encouragement or support, and has done a really great job here at St. John's.
Pastor Mike's a fine gentleman. Being a Southern boy as he is, you know, he enjoys good Southern cooking, which fits in well with the men of St. John's, as we've already kind of kicked around here a little bit. But yes, it was a transition when he came in, and very thankful for his work, for his leadership, for his ministries. He has been very helpful on more than one occasion when I've had the need for pastoral guidance. Very happy that he's here. He is a quality person.
Well, I think Pastor Mike and I have a really good working relationship. I've played in many different churches, and I've had an experience with a lot of different pastors, and Pastor Mike and I really do work well together. He's an extremely good listener. He's very cooperative, and we meet at least once a month to go over liturgy planning and hymns, and we do that together, and it works well, so that we have a chance then to sometimes even read through some scripture or occasionally have a prayer, and we discuss other things too. If I'm having a problem, or sometimes he has a bad day and he's able to share something with me. So it's also sort of a therapeutic time as well for both of us. So it's a good thing.
Well, we first met Pastor Mike when Mark and I joined St. John's, and I think that Pastor Mike was one of the big reasons why we joined here. I know Mark especially really enjoyed his sermons, and I think one of the best things about Pastor Mike is he's so relatable and laid back as a person. You just feel like you can really talk to him, and you don't feel like this barrier in between you. You feel like you could tell him anything, like he's your buddy. And I think that's one of the things that my husband really liked about him as well.
The direction of Pastor Robinson began a period of transition as new ideas and relationships within the congregation began to form. New foundations for programs were established. Some opened the door for current activities and outreach programs that we see today at St. John's. The youth program at St. John's has always been a source of fun, learning, and fellowship. Youth directors such as John Clindworth made great impacts on the growth of the youth program at St. John's. His vision and creativity were felt throughout the church. His legacy remains a foundation of the current program for young people here at St. John's.
This is a memorial to John Clindworth, who was a longtime member of St. John's and also youth director up until his passing. And this piece of work was commissioned by the Pittsburgh School of Art, and they did a wonderful job, and it was inspired by this scripture verse from Revelation. On either side of the river is a tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruits, producing fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. And so we put this up in memory of John.
The youth program needed a new vision and injection of enthusiasm. Carrie Anderson found a home here at St. John's, filling that role. Carrie's vision brought new life into the congregation and increased participation in youth activities. Vacation Bible School, the Christmas pageant, and other youth activities filled the church with joy.
Well, at the time, I had quit my job as a teacher, an instrumental music teacher, and I had just given birth to Ryan, so I was a stay-at-home mom. He was about a year old at the time, and I was starting to feel a bit antsy at home, and so I was looking for something to do outside that would give me a flexible schedule. And I saw that there was going to be an opening for a youth director here, and I thought that would be an amazing opportunity because when we joined St. John's, one thing that I was really concerned about is that the children weren't going to Lutherland and they weren't going to the youth gatherings, which were a big part of my time as a youth in my church. And I knew it was something that I would want my children to experience. So when I saw that opening, I felt like God was calling me to apply for the position. And so I applied, and they interviewed me, and I accepted the job. And so I've been here ever since. So currently, we have 3 different groups here for our youth. Our first group is our Kids Club, which is for children aged kindergarten through 3rd grade. And then we have our St. John's Juniors, which is 4th grade through 6th grade. And then we have our LYO, which stands for the Lutheran Youth Organization. And that's a term that they use throughout the ELCA for the 7th through 12th grade youth. So our Kids Club actually came about a couple years ago. Up until that point, we had been doing more family activities so that we could have larger groups together and have a more community feel. But then we started getting so many children that we decided to start a actual group up for them again. And we created the Kids Club. And we started out with the Kids Club actually going from kindergarten all the way to 6th. And then we would break them off. But that became so large that we ended up creating the St. John's Juniors again last year. And the Kids Club is run kind of VBS style. So we have an opening where we do a worship service and sing a song and do a prayer. We learn a Bible verse and a Bible story. And then the kids go and they either do a craft or a service project. And then we play games, and we also have snack for them. So they have a lot of fun doing that. And then our older group, our St. John's Juniors, this year we did the Amazing Race for them. So they would start out with a Bible study with one part of the Bible, and then we would go on an amazing race and collect all different kinds of clues and things that related to our Bible story. And they also had a really great time doing that.
The choir grew in their voices. Christian education and benevolent outreach broadened. The women's and men's groups of St. John's were revitalized and reorganized under the leadership of Jim and Catherine Graham.
I consider myself the CCO of the Women of St. John's, which is the Chief Communications Officer. Interestingly enough, the group was actually the brainchild of a person who is no longer a member of our church, Janine Nazak. When she and her husband were members, her husband was involved with the men's group, and she felt that it would be a good thing to have a women's group of a similar vein. So she talked to me about it. We were friends. Her daughter was down in the nursery with me. And I said, sounds great. Let me know what I can do to help you, get it started, get it rolling. And that's how this all came to be. The Women of St. John's is involved in a number of different activities within the church home and also outside of the church home. We like to try and have events that are suitable to different age groups, sometimes younger kids, sometimes older members, and everything in between. One of our biggest outreaches is the Christian Closet, which was the brainchild of Christy Liebeck and Judy McKenna. It is not worked out exactly as they had thought. Their idea was to have a room here dedicated to used clothing that people could come and access, but what it has morphed into has become very successful, and we enjoy doing it. We enjoy having the clothing and those things available for community people to purchase or people within the church to purchase, and then the money is donated outside of the church. One of our other biggest fundraisers here is our spaghetti dinner and bake sale. That is very popular, especially Mr. Eduardo, our accordion player. When I first mentioned that to my husband Jim, he kind of laughed a little bit about the idea, but it is really a good time, and it's a way to bring, again, all different ages together, some fellowship, some good food, and of course the bake sale with the wonderful bakers at St. John's, which is a really popular event. Also at the church, we do some maintenance items. We have made hymnal markers. We have cleaned out the kitchen refrigerator, cleaned out the kitchen. Some of the ladies spiffed up the church pews with a lot of elbow grease. We plant flowers every year outside to help beautify the property.
The Men of St. John's exists to provide Christian fellowship, service, outreach for and by the men of our congregation. I've been involved with it for probably the last 10 plus years or so. Kind of by default ended up being the, as my wife would say, the chief communications officer. I end up sending out the emails that hit everybody just about every week to let everyone know what's going on, but try to keep the calendar. But it is a group open to all men, young and old. I shouldn't say old, but young and not so young in our congregation. And we are here to help our church thrive and to serve our community. The Men of St. John's tries to keep a fairly active calendar through the year. We can be nothing if not consistent. Starting in January, we help with the serving the meal for our annual congregational meeting. February, we're very happy to partake and sit at the table and critique the kitchen etiquette of the Women of St. John's for the spaghetti dinner that they run, but we very much enjoy and are happy to participate and help with that. Throughout the spring, we're relatively quiet, but except for our flea market that we run in April, which is one of our primary fundraisers. Through the summer, we're relatively quiet, but then we pick up again in fall for the flea market in October. And our really big event for the year is the pork and kraut dinner that we run every November, second Saturday generally. A lot of things the Men of St. John's do tend to revolve around food. I guess just that's why we're in the kitchen here. And ongoing throughout the year is every second Saturday we do get together for breakfast. But with the fundraising events that we operate, again, the big ones being the pork and kraut dinner and the flea markets, we make good use, or as best use as we can, with the generosity of our congregation to help find worthy causes to donate the funds to. We do outreach work. We have worked with Glade Run in the past, and I'd like to get us back involved with them a little bit more. Each year we cook and serve dinner for the Pleasant Valley Men's Shelter, which is part of Northside Common Ministries, and we're always very happy to do that. Again, when we're feeding people, we're generally very happy.
Yet, there was still more to be done. The programs were in place, but needed a leader to move them forward and a visionary to extend them beyond the church walls. And one of the greatest examples of this came in the form of a 6'4" gentle giant named Jack Schattauer. Jack was not just a physical presence, but a spiritual one as well. He first became president of Church Council in 2002 and set to work on the task of moving the church forward. Jack pioneered new ideas for church services, community outreach programs, and sought to bring people together to create a sense of purpose and community. Jack was a leader in every sense of the word. A role he especially enjoyed was serving as an assistant minister. The summer fireside services were a direct result of Jack's creativity and inspiration, as was the beginning of the farmers market across the street from the church. Jack always knew how to put people in the right places to create positive change.
Jack Shattauer had a big presence in this church, and we are very thankful for the time that he was with us. Where I got to know him the best, I had a very short tenure in the presidency of council and had to resign for personal reasons, and Jack picked up that ball and ran with it. And throughout the couple of years thereafter, he and I were in close communication on a lot of church matters, and I found him to be wise, to be caring, and he will be missed from this congregation.
Well, Jack I asked Jack to come on to council, and he agreed to come on to council. And then I says, well, if you'd be president, I'll be your vice president. And he says, okay, Dan, I'll do that. So Jack was very influential. I mean, he's a gentle giant. And he really kicked off our fireside services, which we're going into our 4th year. And for a Wednesday night, I think we averaged about 34 to 35 people in the Becker Pavilion, which is, which is great. I mean, Jack would be very proud of where this is going. In other programs, Jack supported, and he was just a born leader. And I was very fortunate to be his friend.
I met Jack whenever he was on church council, whenever I arrived here at St. John's in 2001. He was elected council president shortly after that in January of 2002. And over my tenure, he has he served church council on church council probably, I would say, about half of that time. Rotating on and off, sometimes serving just as a council member at large, but most of the time as council president. We were very close. We would oftentimes meet prior to the council meeting and set the agenda. He really wanted St. John's always to put its best foot forward. He made a lot of aesthetic changes here at our congregation, such as the glass doors going into the undercroft from the outside, and also a lot of things in terms of making sure that the planters were planted with flowers and that everything was really upkept. We replaced the fence in the cemetery. We also during this time when he was serving, built the pavilion across the street and the bocce courts. And so he really wanted to make sure that St. John's had a name for itself. Also, he was very much in favor of the farmers market, which I believe is one of the things that has helped make us more visible. And he really did get behind the idea of the fireside service, and which we have on Wednesdays during the summer months. So he was very committed to this church. He loved serving at the 8 o'clock service as an assisting minister. And really we had many conversations on a church level, but also on a personal level as well, concerning a whole variety of topics. He's one person that is greatly missed here at this congregation.
Inspired a new generation of young families, members, and leadership in the church until his sudden death in April of 2016. Jack was an integral part of why St. John's was able to move forward and continue our mission of service in Christ's name. His legacy lives on in the people and programs of our church. Progress, change. These are rarely easy, but at St. John's, change brings a promise of hope, spiritual growth, and fellowship as we move into the next 50 years.
So in the future for the youth here at St. John's, I really see the program growing. Already there's always more excitement. I hear about more kids wanting to come. And it's been a really positive experience the last couple years for all of our youth.
Well, being relatively new here, I don't really have a history with the congregation, but my wife and I have really enjoyed being a part of the congregation for this past year and a half. We've enjoyed attending some of the dinners and the plays that have taken place, and it's been very rewarding to get to meet some of the members here. My hope, I think, would be that St. John's continues to thrive in the community. They do a great job with community service and the food bank and those sorts of things. But those types of things are really great, and a hope would be that they continue to pray and about other missions that perhaps are still unknown and that would work here in the North Hills.
The future of the Men of St. John's, I hope, would entail a continuance of the service to our congregation, service to our community, help where help is needed. It would be a wonderful thing if there was always more involved, but the opportunities exist, and we are thankful for those who participate as much or as little as they can or are able when they are able. Future-wise, I very much look forward to our younger Men of St. John's, which join us for breakfast, join us to help with some of our events. I look forward to the day when they're sitting here around in the kitchen having coffee during the Sunday school hour and planning out all the events that the Men of St. John's will continue to do.
Well, I believe that going forward, you know, the different programs that we have, our men and women's group are getting stronger, and me being president is just, you know, help facilitate, you know, what these groups are doing. Our youth is getting stronger, and I think we're going in a good direction, and I'm very excited, and I'm excited to be involved with the 150th. You know, and it so happened to be that I am the president for it, so it's an exciting time for me.
My hope for the Women of St. John's is that it remains a strong and active force within our church. I hope that new members will find us to be a welcoming group, that they feel that they can participate, and that they will be welcomed with open arms by the various members that are already participating. I'd like to see us continue our outreaches outside of the church. I think we could do more things in the community, perhaps more things with the food bank. Recently we did a global links outreach, which was packing medical supplies to go overseas. I'd like to see us do more things of that nature. Again, a great opportunity for us all to get involved, to participate, and to help people outside of our church home.
How will our church change and evolve? What have we learned from the history of our community, and how will these lessons shape what we become in the next 50 years? St. John's Foundation has always been rooted in the hope and promise of God's love and our ability to show the love of Jesus Christ through our ministry, outreach, and fellowship. We celebrate this 150th anniversary as a community of worshipers of Christ and a Christian family with one mission: to know the love of God and to show the love of Christ.
Experts are saying that we live in the post-Christian era, which bothers me because I don't see the church ever failing. My grandfather worked for the Benelin Trees Oil Company, and he was enchanted with Gulf oil. And I can remember my grandfather saying, you know, as long as human beings exist on this planet, Gulf Oil will be a viable company. We know what happened to Gulf Oil. my point is, our Lord said that the church will last forever. The church on earth, the church in heaven, however and whenever and however that is. But I see St. John's having existed for 150 years now, meeting all the challenges that came in those 150 years. You think of how civilization has science, medicine, all the things that have meant so many changes, and all the wars, St. John's has made it through. And I see a bright future for St. John's as long as we remain faithful to the gospel. That's Mr. Imfang's verse. It really says it all, and it says it all about the church. Be faithful unto death to get the crown of life,
I've tried to imagine what the year 2067 will look like, and it is a humbling thought for me that as I gather around the children's sermon, all the children gathered around me during the children's sermon will be approximately about my age whenever that happens. And I wonder what the world will actually look like. So it's kind of hard for me to imagine. I hope that we stay true to the basics, though, of the foundation of the church, which is the love of God found in Christ Jesus. And also that worship remains dynamic and Christ-centered. Those are my goals for this particular congregation. And of course, there will be a lot of benevolent work still to be done. But I hope that those core values that we have, or the guiding principles that a couple of years ago we set forth, that those will still be in place and will still lead the future St. John's during its 200th celebration.